I froze. My heart felt like it had stopped beating. The $2.3 million were gone. In their place, the bank statement showed that the charitable foundation bearing my late wife's name had exactly 14 cents left. 14 cents. Not $14,000. Not 1,400. Just 14 cents, a single dime, and 4 lonely pennies sitting where $2.3 million had once been. Money my wife and I had spent a lifetime building to help people who had far less than we did. In just 3 days, our annual charity gala, the most important event of the year for the foundation, was supposed to begin. Yet all that remained in the account were 14 cold, lifeless cents, almost as if someone had been cruel enough to leave them behind as a final insult. The next morning, I called the bank. My hands were as steady as they had been through 40 years of performing surgery and saving lives, but deep down, I knew something unimaginably terrible had happened. Then the bank manager spoke. Just 9 words. 9 words that squeezed the air from my lungs and stopped my heart more completely than any cardiac arrest I had ever witnessed in an operating room. But doctor, you personally authorized those wire transfers. I had authorized nothing. I had signed nothing. I had spoken to no one. But somebody had. Somebody with my voice, my signature, my social security number, and my family's absolute unquestioned trust. And by the time I finished pulling on that one loose thread, I would discover that the 14 cents was not the crime. The 14 cents was the receipt. The crime was a machine, patient, elegant, and years in the making, built by 2 men who sat at my Thanksgiving table, who toasted my late wife's memory with tears in their eyes, and who had already decided, calmly and in writing, exactly which Friday of the month I would stop being useful to them. They made only one mistake. They stole from a man who spent 4 decades finding the one shadow on a scan that everybody else missed. If you believe family can't do this to family, stay with me until the end of this story because I am going to show you the paperwork. And if you're new here, take 1 second to subscribe and tap the like button, because stories like mine are the reason some grandfather somewhere is going to check his accounts tonight and catch the knife before it lands. My name is Dr. Nathaniel Whitmore. I am 72 years old, and for 41 years I was a cardiothoracic surgeon in Charleston, South Carolina. I have held more than 300 living human hearts in my hands. I have felt them stall, stutter, and start again under my fingers. There is a valve repair technique in the textbooks with my name on it. I tell you this not to impress you. At my age, impressing people is a young man's hobby, but so you understand one thing about the man in this story. I was trained, drilled, and burned by 5 decades of practice to stay calm while something is dying right in front of me. My mentor carved a sentence into me when I was 26 years old and shaking over my first open chest, and I have repeated it every morning since. Panic is the enemy of a steady hand. I would need that sentence more in my 72nd year than I ever needed it in any operating room. 4 years ago, I lost my Camille. 46 years of marriage, and her heart, of all the hearts in the world, hers, carried a defect that sat too deep, wrapped around too much, for anyone to touch. I flew her to colleagues in 3 states, men I had trained, women who had written the newest chapters of the textbooks. They all looked at her scans, and then they looked at me, and I knew that look, because I had given that look to other families 1,000 times, standing in quiet hallways in my scrubs. The surgeon who had repaired 300 strangers' hearts stood beside his own wife's bed and could do nothing at all but hold her hand and count her heartbeats like a miser, counting the last coins in the world. Before she died, Camille made me promise her one thing: not to remarry, not to travel, not to be happy. She was too practical a woman to demand happiness on a schedule. She asked me to build something, so I did. The Camille Whitmore Heart Foundation. Every year it paid for surgeries for children whose parents could not afford them. The little ones born with hearts the size of walnuts and defects the size of futures. Every year we held one gala, 300 guests, black ties and raised paddles, and every dollar of it flowed to operating rooms where some other surgeon's steady hands did for those children what I could not do for my wife. That foundation was not a charity to me. It was a grave I could visit that gave something back. It was the last conversation I was still having with her. The house has been quiet since she left. My daughter lives in Oregon. My granddaughter, Maddie, 17 years old, sharp as a scalpel and twice as stubborn, calls me every Sunday, and wants to be a pediatric cardiologist. God help her. For my birthday 2 years ago, she gave me a box set of expensive blue-black gel pens, because she'd noticed I still signed everything with whatever chewed ballpoint was closest. A man who invented a valve, she said, should not sign his name with a pen from a motel. I laughed, thanked her, put the box in my desk drawer, and, I'll be honest with you, never opened it. I am a creature of habit. Remember that little box of pens? I did not know it yet. But my granddaughter's birthday gift was going to hang 2 men. Now, here is the paradox I want you to sit with. The question that kept me standing at my study window at 3 in the morning, watching the live oaks move in the dark. I could read a human heart through an inch of closed chest. I could look at a shadow on a scan, a smudge, a whisper, a thing 99 people would scroll right past and tell you what it was, how long it had been growing, and how many months it had been lying to the body around it. That was my gift, finding what hides. And yet for 5 years at my own dinner table sat a thing that was hiding and growing and lying, and I passed it the sweet tea every Sunday and never saw a single shadow. You would think a man who spent his life detecting what kills people quietly would detect it in his own bloodline, you would think. The statement arrived on a Tuesday. Ordinary envelope, ordinary window of cellophane, the bank's logo in the corner. I almost didn't open it. Everything is electronic now, and my brother's financial advisor, Julian Rourke, the polished man who handled all of that for our family, had told me years ago to stop reading statements. Doctor, you fixed hearts. Let me fix decimals. You've earned the rest. Everyone laughed when he said things like that. Julian was easy to laugh with. That Tuesday, for no reason I can name, call it habit, call it Camille, elbowing me from wherever she watches, I slit the envelope open with the letter knife she bought me in Vienna, and I unfolded the paper under the yellow lamp, and I read the closing balance of my wife's foundation. $0.14. I remember the physical details with a surgeon's memory, because that is how my mind files catastrophe. The paper was cold. The lamp buzzed faintly. Somewhere down the street a dog barked twice and stopped. I stood still. I did not shout. I did not call anyone. I read the statement again, top to bottom, line by line, the way you reread a scan when you're praying you misread the first time and you already know you didn't. Page after page of outgoing wire transfers, spaced with a craftsman's patience. 18 months of them, each one authorized, each one confirmed, each one initialed with my initials. $2.3 million, drained out of a dead woman's promise in polite, unhurried sips, like a man emptying a wine cellar 1 bottle a week so the racks always look full from the doorway. 14 cents. They hadn't even taken the last 14 cents. And somehow it was that detail, more than the missing millions, that made my hands go still on the paper, because leaving 14 cents is not carelessness. Leaving 14 cents keeps the account technically open, technically active, technically unremarkable to every automatic system that flags a closed account. Whoever did this understood machinery. Whoever did this was not stealing in a panic. Whoever did this was performing a procedure. I sat down in Camille's reading chair, which I never sit in, and I stayed there until the sky went gray. And at 9 o'clock sharp the next morning, I was standing in the marble lobby of the bank in my good jacket, holding that statement like a biopsy report, asking, calmly, so calmly, to speak with the branch manager about a series of unauthorized transfers. The manager was a courteous man in his 50s named Whitfield, and I watched courtesy drain out of his face and confusion flow in as he pulled up the account. He turned his monitor toward me. He walked me through the audit trail with the careful, slightly slowed-down voice people use with the elderly, and every screen he showed me was worse than the last. The transfers had not been sneaked past anyone. They had walked through the front door. Verbal confirmations, recorded phone calls, security questions, my mother's maiden name, the street I grew up on, the make of my first car, answered instantly, without one wrong breath. In a warm baritone, the bank's own verification system had matched, call after call, to the voice print on file. Mine, Dr. Whitmore, the manager said gently, and there was pity in it now. The terrible institutional pity that I would come to know well over the following weeks. I understand this is upsetting, but you authorized these transfers yourself. I personally spoke with you about the largest one. March 14th, 11:40 in the morning. You were very pleasant. You made a joke about golf. March 14th, 11:40 in the morning. I stood in that marble lobby and felt the floor tilt, not from frailty, not from age, but from the vertigo of a man watching two facts collide that cannot both exist in the same universe. Because I do not need a calendar to tell you where I was on the morning of March 14th. Every year on that date, on the anniversary of the week Camille died, I scrub back in, one day only, one case only, as the assisting surgeon on a foundation charity operation. It is the one promise I still keep with my own hands. And this March 14th, from 7 in the morning until nearly 2 in the afternoon, I was standing under the lights at St. Anselm's, gowned and gloved and masked, with a 6-year-old girl's walnut-sized heart beating against my fingers, while a room full of witnesses, nurses, machines, and time-stamped records watched every minute of it. At 11:40 in the morning, while a man on the phone was charming a bank manager with my voice and a joke about golf, both of my hands were inside a child's open chest. I did not say any of this to Mr. Whitfield. I looked at him for a long moment, and then I heard myself say, in a voice so level it frightened me a little, "Thank you. That's very helpful. Could I trouble you for copies of everything and the dates and times of every one of those calls?" Because standing in that lobby, 40 years of discipline closed over my panic like a gloved hand closing over a bleed, and one thought surfaced through the cold, clear and diagnostic and absolute. Whoever spoke to that banker had my voice. Not an imitation good enough to fool a stranger, a voice good enough to fool a machine, which meant he had studied it, fed on it, rehearsed it, hours of it. Birthdays, toasts, home videos, Sunday dinners. Whoever he was, he hadn't robbed me on March 14th. He had been robbing me for years, and he had been sitting close enough to record me laughing. I spent the next 2 days doing what I do when a patient presents with impossible symptoms. I stopped theorizing and started pulling records. Every scrap of paper, every authorization, every document with my name on it that had passed through that bank in 5 years. And on the second afternoon, in a windowless records room that smelled of toner and cold coffee, a polite young associate laid a document in front of me that changed the shape of everything. It was called an amendment to the Nathaniel Whitmore Charitable Trust. 11 pages, dense, competent, beautifully drafted legal prose. And what those 11 pages did, in language so smooth you could slide down it, was quietly reroute the plumbing of my wife's foundation. Investment authority, disbursement authority, signatory power, all of it consolidated, for efficiency of administration, into an entity called the Whitmore Family Office, a limited liability company. An entity I had never formed. An entity, I would learn, that had been registered by Julian Rourke, with my brother Gordon, listed as a managing member. The amendment gave that company the keys to everything, and it explained, in one cold stroke, why 18 months of wire transfers had sailed through every compliance check the bank had. On paper, nothing had been stolen. On paper, I had handed it all over myself. At the bottom of page 11 was my signature, my full, formal signature, Nathaniel Whitmore, medical doctor, the one I've signed on consent forms and death certificates for 40 years, every loop and hesitation of it correct, and next to it, a date. September the 9th, 2019. I stared at that date for a long time. 2019. Camille had been gone barely 6 months. In September of 2019, I was a man who could hardly sign a grocery receipt. A man whose own daughter was flying in monthly because she didn't like how I sounded on the phone. The idea that in that fog I had sat down and executed an 11-page restructuring of her trust and then forgotten it so completely that no shadow of it remained was obscene. But it was also, I understood with a chill, plausible. That was the genius of the date. They hadn't forged a document into the strongest year of my life. They had forged it into the weakest. Any lawyer, any judge, any doctor looking at a grieving question mark of a widower would find it entirely believable that he'd signed something in 2019 and lost it in the fog. The date wasn't a detail. The date was a weapon aimed at my credibility. "Would you like a copy, sir?" the associate asked. "I'd like to," I said. And the notary page. The notarization was there, of course. A stamp, a seal, a commission number, South Carolina, all in order. Everything was in order. That was what kept striking me, over and over, like a dull bell, the flawlessness of it. In medicine we have a saying, when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. But I had spent a career on the cases where it was zebras, and every instinct sharpened by those cases was standing up now and saying the same thing. Healthy tissue is never this perfect. Only the lab-grown lie is symmetrical. I called Gordon that evening. My little brother. 68 years old, 4 years my junior, retired from 3 different careers that had never loved him back. I want to be honest with you about Gordon, because this story does not work if I pretend I was blind out of stupidity. I was blind out of history. When you have carried someone since he was 6, through failed businesses, through a divorce I paid for, through the pension he lost in 2008, you stop auditing him. He becomes a fixed expense of the heart. Gordon was the one who had brought Julian Rourke into our lives 5 years ago, glowing like a man who had finally found the room where the smart money sat. Nate, you fix hearts. Julian fixes futures. Let somebody take care of you for once. And I had been tired, and grieving, and grateful. Gordy, I said on the phone, keeping my voice easy. I was at the bank today, tidying paperwork. There's an amendment to Camille's trust from 2019, the family office consolidation. Refresh my memory on that. There was a pause. 2 seconds, maybe 3. You would need my ears to have heard it. The ears of a man who has listened to 10,000 hearts and knows the sound of a skipped beat. Sure, Gordon said, warm as ever. The consolidation. Julian set that up after Camille passed, remember, so you wouldn't be drowning in statements. You signed it at his office. Nate, and here his voice softened into something I would learn to hate, a tone like a hand patting a dog. Is everything okay? You've been forgetting things lately, buddy. Little things. It happens to all of us. I had not been forgetting things. I want that on the record. My memory is a filing cabinet other surgeons use to joke about. But do you see the elegance of it? 1 sentence. You've been forgetting things lately. Planted like a seed in soft soil. Say it enough times, to enough people, and it stops being a claim and becomes a diagnosis. They weren't just stealing my money. They were pre-writing the explanation for the day I noticed. You're probably right, I said. It slipped my mind. Listen, set up a sit-down with Julian this week, would you? Just to get the full picture in my head again. Of course, Nate. He'll be glad to. He worries about you. I'll bet he does, I thought, and hung up, and stood in my dark kitchen listening to the refrigerator hum, feeling something I had not felt since my residency. The specific loneliness of being the only person in the building who knows the patient is dying. The offices of Rourke Capital Advisors occupied the 9th floor of a glass building downtown, and everything in them was engineered to say one word: permanence. Walnut, brass, oil paintings of harbors. Julian Rourke came around his desk with both hands extended like a bishop, 54 years old, silver at the temples, cufflinks the color of old money. A man so groomed he seemed laminated. Gordon was already there, sunk deep in a leather chair, smiling too much. Doctor, Julian said, pressing my hand in both of his. The man himself. Sit. Gordon says you've got questions about the architecture. Good. I wish more clients your age took an interest. Your age. Every third sentence. A small, soft hammer. I laid it out mildly. The balance, the transfers, my surprise, playing not the surgeon, but the patient. Puzzled, apologetic, a step behind. And I watched Julian Rourke do something I have only otherwise seen in the finest attending physicians delivering the worst possible news. He got smoother. He turned his monitor toward me and conducted a guided tour of my own dispossession, and it was a symphony. What you're seeing, Nathaniel, isn't a zero balance. It's a sweep structure. The foundation's liquidity doesn't sit in the operating account anymore. It sweeps nightly into the master allocation at the family office level. Inter-fund journal entries. The tax forms haven't settled for the quarter, so the sub-account reads low. An artifact of the reporting layer, nothing more. Your capital isn't gone, it's pooled, diversified, working. You signed the consolidation in 2019. Best decision you ever made, even if, and here came a small, forgiving smile, you don't remember making it. I want you to notice what he did, because this is how predators in tailored wool operate, and someone watching this needs to recognize it someday across a desk of their own. He never denied a single fact. He re-diagnosed every fact. The empty account became a reporting artifact. The stripped trust became architecture. My alarm became a symptom, terminology as anesthesia. I knew the technique intimately, because surgeons use it too. God forgive us. When we stand in hallways and say we lost perfusion to a family instead of saying her heart stopped and I couldn't start it. Jargon is how you sedate a room. They didn't lie to me that afternoon. They diagnosed me with a condition they had invented. And the March transfers, I asked. The bank says I called them. You did, Julian said gently. Nathaniel, you did. I was copied on the confirmations. He let the silence sit, then leaned in, warm as broth. Look, between the three of us, memory does what memory does. It's nothing to be ashamed of, but it is one more reason to finish what we started. Full discretionary authority, one signature, and you never have to look at another statement or defend another phone call you don't recall making. You've earned the rest, Doctor. Let the machine carry you now. He's right, Nate, Gordon said from his chair. Right on cue, not quite meeting my eyes. Let go of the wheel a little. There it was. The whole geometry of the operation in a single sentence, offered to me across a walnut desk like a mint on a pillow. The theft wasn't finished. The theft wanted my signature, a real one this time, notarized in daylight, retroactively laundering every forged page that came before it. The amendment of 2019 was the tumor. The document they were drafting now was the tissue they'd graft over it, so no scan on Earth would ever find the margins. I looked at my brother. I looked at the man beside him, and I said, "Draw up whatever you think is best, Julian. I'll look at it after the gala. An old man can only absorb so much architecture in 1 week." I even laughed at myself a little. It cost me more than any incision I have ever made. Julian walked me to the elevator personally, one hand on my shoulder, telling a story about a senator's pudding game. As the doors opened, he straightened my collar, the way you'd tidy a body, and smiled a smile of pure, patient ownership. "Enjoy the gala, Doctor. It's going to be a night nobody forgets." The doors closed on him standing there, adjusting one gold cufflink, and on Gordon behind him, in the lobby's soft light, studying the carpet like a man who has decided the carpet is fascinating, because the carpet, at least, had never carried him on its shoulders at a county fair. That smile stayed with me the whole drive home. I have seen that smile before, you know, not on men, on films. There is a kind of mass that presents beautifully. Round, calm, well-defined borders. The radiologist's word is unremarkable. It sits there smiling on the screen while it seeds itself through the lymphatics. The smile means nothing. The smile is what it grows to survive. You do not argue with the smile. You biopsy it. I did not sleep that night. And I need you to understand what happened in my study in those hours, because it is the hinge on which this entire story turns. The first hour was rage. The hot, animal kind. My hands shook. I, whose hands had not shaken since 1979, stood at the window wanting to drive back downtown and put Julian Rourke through his own oil painting, wanting to grab my brother by his soft lapels and roar 60 years of ledger entries into his face. The tuition, the bailouts, the divorce, the decades of quiet checks. I rehearsed the confrontation until my jaw ached. And then, somewhere around 2 a.m, the surgeon walked into the room and took over from the brother, and the temperature dropped, and I am not ashamed to tell you it was a relief, like a fever breaking. Because rage is a diagnosis of the rager. Rage was exactly what they were waiting for. An erratic old man, shouting accusations he couldn't document, in front of witnesses, right before a competency conversation. No, I did not shout. I did not weep. I did not pick up the phone. A surgeon does not rage at the tumor. He does not take the tumor personally. He stages it, maps its blood supply, and schedules the operation. And every forgery, I said out loud to the empty study, to Camille's photograph, to whatever part of her still audits this house, every forgery is a tumor, and every tumor casts a shadow. You just have to know how to read the film. So I turned on the desk lamp, took out the copy of the 2019 amendment, and laid it under the illuminated magnifier I use for tying flies. Page 11. The signature. My signature, allegedly 7 years old. I studied it the way I studied scans at midnight. No theory, no emotion, just eyes. And the first thing that troubled me was its health. Signatures written by a man 6 months into brutal grief wobble. They faint at the ends of loops. This one was strong, confident, metronomically even in pressure and pace. A performance of my signature, note perfect, by someone who had practiced it the way pianists practice. That was suspicion. That was not proof. The proof was the ink. Under the magnifier, at the raking angle of the lamp, the line of that signature had a particular character. A dense, saturated blue-black gel laid down wet and even, with a faint sheen where it pooled at the turns. I know that ink. I know it, the way you know a voice. I sat still for a moment. Then I opened the bottom right drawer of my desk, and I took out a small box I had never opened, still carrying the ghost of a crease from its birthday paper, Maddie's gift. The fancy blue-black gel pens, for a man who invented a valve. I uncapped one and signed my name beside the photocopy, and I watched the two lines dry side by side under the lamp, identical twins, the same dense blue-black, the same wet sheen at the turns. Then I turned the box over and read the small print I already knew was there. That ink formulation, that line, that pen, first manufactured, first sold, first existing anywhere on this earth, in 2023. The document said 2019. The ink said 2023. Paper can lie about a date. Chemistry cannot. Somewhere across town, my brother and his laminated friend were sleeping soundly, certain their tumor was invisible. And I sat alone in the lamplight, holding the one pen in Charleston that could hang them both, thinking, gentlemen, the film is back from radiology, and the shadow is exactly where I thought it would be. The morning after the ink told me its secret, I made 2 phone calls, and I want you to understand that both of them were performances, rehearsed in front of the bathroom mirror, the way a young resident rehearses telling a family bad news. The first call was to Gordon. I let my voice sit lower than usual, slower, with a small sigh built into the front of it, the sigh of a man who has spent the night being defeated by his own paperwork. Gordy, I said, about yesterday. I owe you and Julian an apology. I could hear him shift the phone against his ear. I could hear hope moving in him like a pulse coming back. Nate, come on. You never owe me anything. No, I said. Let me say it. I sat up half the night with those statements, and I could not make heads or tails of them, and that scared me, Gordy. A few years ago I would have read those pages like an X-ray. Now the columns just swim. Maybe you and Julian are right. Maybe it is time I stop pretending I can captain everything myself. There was a silence on the line, and inside that silence I could hear my brother believing me. That is a terrible thing to hear if you are listening closely. It is the sound of a door you held open for 60 years, finally clicking shut from the other side. You are doing the right thing, Nate, Gordon said, warm as gravy. Julian will draw up the discretionary authority. Full portfolio, one signature, and you never worry again. After the gala, I said, Saturday belongs to Camille. The following Friday I will come to the office, and I will sign whatever Julian puts in front of me. Tell him that word for word, whatever he puts in front of me. You would think it would be hard to say a sentence like that to the man planning to strip your life. It was not hard. It was anesthesia, and I was the one holding the mask. Because here is what 50 years in operating rooms teaches you about the moment before an operation. The patient must believe he is simply going to sleep. If the patient suspects what the knives are for, the body fights, the vitals spike, everything becomes dangerous. Julian Rourke and my brother were now my patients. I needed their vitals calm, their guard down, their paperwork flowing in nice, fat, documented rivers, right up until the second the lights came on. So I gave them the one drug no con man can resist. I gave them a victim who had stopped struggling. Gordon was so relieved he got talkative, and talkative men make gifts of themselves. Before he hung up, he told me, laughing, that Julian had said just last week that I was the most graceful client he had ever worked with. Graceful. File that word away. Men like Julian have a private dictionary, and in that dictionary, graceful means almost finished. The second call I made that morning was to the medical records office at St. Anselm's Hospital, where I requested, as the assisting surgeon of record, certified copies of the operative log for March 14th. Case start time, case end time, Staff sign-ins, the anesthesia record with its minute-by-minute entries, the whole beautiful bureaucratic skeleton of a morning spent inside a 6-year-old's chest. The clerk asked me why I needed it. Continuing education, I told her, which was not entirely a lie. I was about to educate several people. Then I sat down at my desk with Maddie's pen and a fresh legal pad, and I did what I have done my entire professional life when a case begins. I opened a chart. Patient, I wrote. The Nathaniel Whitmore Heart Foundation, presenting complaint, sudden catastrophic loss of $2.3 million. History, 5 years of management by Rourke Capital Advisors, introduced by family member. Findings so far, and here I began to number them the way I numbered lesions on a film. Finding 1. A trust amendment dated September 9, 2019, bearing a signature executed in a gel ink formulation that did not exist until 2023. A document cannot be signed 4 years before its own ink is invented. This was no longer suspicion. This was pathology. Finding 2. A voice on recorded bank calls good enough to defeat voice print verification, meaning hours of studio quality source audio, meaning family videos, meaning someone inside the family had supplied the tissue sample. Finding 3. A notary stamp from South Carolina, on a document I intended to look at much, much harder. I sat back and looked at my chart, and I felt the old feeling, the one from tumor boards on Thursday mornings, when the film goes up on the light box and the room goes quiet. Chromatography does not care whose brother you are. Ink chemistry has no memory of Thanksgiving. Metadata does not weep at funerals. I had spent my career trusting instruments over stories, because stories comfort and instruments testify. My family had given me a story. The evidence was already contradicting it. And when the story and the scan disagree, doctor, you treat the scan. But I also knew my limits, and this is important, because pride is how old men lose. I could see the shadow. I could not stage it. My magnifier and my birthday pen were enough to convince me. But they would convince no judge, no jury, no federal investigator, no ballroom full of donors. What I held was a suspicious film. What I needed was a biopsy, performed by a certified pathologist of paper, someone whose signature on a report made courtrooms sit up straight. And as I sat there turning that problem over, a name surfaced out of 18 years of memory, attached to a heartbeat I had personally restarted. Let me tell you about Beatrice Langley. 18 years ago, a 63-year-old woman was wheeled into my operating room with an aortic dissection, which is a polite medical way of saying the main pipe out of her heart was tearing itself apart while we watched. The surgery took 19 hours. Twice her pressure fell off the cliff. Twice we hauled it back. Around hour 15, my scrub nurse asked me quietly if we were losing her, and I said the sentence my mentor gave me: panic is the enemy of a steady hand, and we kept sewing. Beatrice Langley walked out of that hospital 31 days later. Every year since, on the anniversary of that surgery, a card has arrived at my office. Always the same handwriting, always the same single line. Still ticking, doctor. Thank you for the time. And here is the shape of providence, or luck, or whatever name you give the architecture under our lives. Beatrice Langley was not a school teacher or a florist. For 30 years, she had been a forensic document examiner for the State Crime Laboratory, one of those quiet wizards who testify about handwriting and ink and paper fiber, the person prosecutors call when a will smells wrong. Retired now, she ran a small private practice out of a converted carriage house, consulting on exactly one kind of case: question documents. The woman whose heart I had rebuilt with my own hands had spent her life dissecting forged signatures. You can call that coincidence. I have stopped calling it anything. I just drove to the carriage house. She opened the door before I finished knocking, took one look at my face, and did not smile the way she usually smiled at me. She stepped back and held the door wide. You are not here about your heart, she said. No, I said. I am here about yours, in a way. I need the examiner, B. Officially. Chain of custody, sworn report, the whole liturgy. Beatrice Langley is 71 years old now, silver-haired, small as a wren, with reading glasses on a chain and eyes that have ended marriages and prison sentences. She sat me down at her big work table under the north window, among the microscopes and the ultraviolet lamps and the reference binders of ink standards going back decades. and she pressed one hand flat against her own sternum, against the scar I knew was under the fabric. 18 years ago you gave me every heartbeat I have had since, she said. Whatever this is, you will not owe me a dime, and I will not hear an argument. Sit down, doctor. Show me the paper. I showed her the paper. I watched her work for 2 hours, and I will tell you, one craftsman to another, it was like watching myself operate. The same stillness. The same refusal to hurry. She photographed the signature page under raking light, under infrared, under ultraviolet. She murmured to herself about line quality and pen lifts and hesitation marks. At one point she laughed. One short, dry note, not amused at all. Whoever wrote this practiced for years, she said. This is not tracing. Tracing trembles. This is what we call a simulated signature by memory. Fluent. Confident. Internalized. Doctor, the person who signed this has been writing your name since long before 2019. This is somebody who grew up next to your handwriting. The room went cold for me then, because only one man on this earth grew up next to my handwriting. She confirmed my ink suspicion within the week, using a technique I will describe only loosely, because this channel entertains, it does not instruct. In her field there are libraries of ink chemistry, formulations cataloged by manufacturer and by year, and a trained examiner can date a line of ink the way I date a bone from its density. Her preliminary finding, stated in the dry language that judges love, was that the questioned signature was executed in an ink formulation first commercially available in 2023, and was therefore physically incapable of having been written on the purported date in 2019, 4 years too young. A document with a birth certificate that contradicted its own blood test. And then B did the thing that turned my case from a grievance into a hunt. She turned the amendment to the notary page, tapped the stamp, and said, "This seal is real, this commission exists." Which means one of two things. Either a licensed notary in this state helped them, or these people are good with computers. Either way, doctor, paper like this is never born alone. Forgers are like your tumors. By the time you find one, you should assume it has already spread. Get me more documents. Get me originals if you can. And get me anything digital, because paper lies better than files do. Files carry their history inside them like rings in a tree. More documents. Originals. Files. All of which lived on the 9th floor of a glass building downtown, behind the walnut and the brass and the laminated smile of Julian Rourke. I could hardly ask him to hand me the evidence for his own indictment. I drove home in the dark, turning the problem over, and the answer to it was already sitting in my mailbox, though I did not know it yet, in a plain envelope with no return address, and we will get there in a moment. First, I had to disappear, because here was my tactical problem, the kind they do not teach in medical school. For the next 2 weeks, I needed to spend my days in a carriage house full of microscopes and my evenings on the phone with people whose job titles would give Julian Rourke a coronary. But I was a graceful client now, a docile old man gliding toward his Friday signature, and docile old men are checked on. Gordon had taken to calling me every other day, friendly little welfare checks, each one a stethoscope pressed against my compliance. If I sounded busy, if I sounded sharp, if I was ever not home when he swung by with barbecue, the patient on the table might wake up early. So I built myself a decoy, and I built it out of the truth, which is how the best decoys are made. Every summer there is a reunion conference of retired cardiothoracic surgeons, old ghosts in golf shirts telling war stories in a hotel in Asheville. I had skipped it for 4 years. This year, I told Gordon over Sunday dinner I was going. 6 days in the mountains. No phone reception worth a damn up there, you know how it is. And it will do me good before the gala, clear my head so I can enjoy Saturday, and then handle our business Friday with a fresh mind. Gordon practically glowed. Of course he did. 6 days of the mark being conveniently, voluntarily, verifiably absent, while the paperwork ripened. He even offered to drive me to the airport, and I let him. And I shook his hand at the curb and told him he was a good brother, and I watched him believe that too. Then I walked into the terminal, waited 40 minutes, took a car back into the city by a different road, and moved into the small guest apartment above B. Langley's carriage house, where the ultraviolet lamps burned every night until 2 in the morning. The old man was officially in the mountains. The surgeon had never left the building, and on the second evening of my invisible week, The envelope with no return address made sense of itself, because a young woman was standing at the carriage house gate in the rain, twisting her car keys like a rosary. I recognized her before she said a word. I had seen her twice on the 9th floor, carrying files behind Julian Rourke, a junior accountant with intelligent, unhappy eyes. Priya Anand, 29 years old, 3 years out of school, the person whose fingers actually touched the ledgers of Rourke Capital every single day. Dr. Whitmore, she said, and her voice was barely holding its lane. You do not know me. I mailed you a note last week and then I prayed you would not answer it. And then I saw you at the bank downtown when you were supposed to be old and confused, and you were not old and confused. You were reading an audit trail like a chart, and I have not slept since. Can I please sit down? There is something about your family's accounts that I was ordered to bury, and if I bury it, I think I go to prison with them. We sat her at B's work table and put tea in front of her, and she wrapped both hands around the cup like it was the only warm thing left in the world. And then she said the sentence I had been waiting 18 months of bank statements to hear. When a client's charity account hits zero, we are supposed to flag it, she whispered. I was told to reclassify it instead, so I started keeping copies. She reached into her coat and slid a small flash drive across the table toward me, slowly, carefully, like it was radioactive. There are 2 sets of books, she said. And doctor, your family is not the first name in the second one. What was on Priya Anand's flash drive took B. Langley and me 3 nights to fully understand, and I want to walk you through it the way I would walk a resident through a difficult film, because the anatomy of this crime is the reason some of you watching are going to save your own families one day. Rourke Capital Advisors kept 2 sets of books. The first set was The Cathedral, the one client saw, glossy quarterly statements full of healthy balances and gentle upward curves, the financial equivalent of a smiling patient portrait. The second set was the autopsy. In the second set, those balances did not exist. In the second set, money that entered the firm from new clients flowed out almost immediately to pay the redemptions of older clients, with generous stops along the way at accounts connected to Julian Rourke personally. There is an old and ugly name for that structure. It is a Ponzi scheme, the same shape they have taken since the 1920s, a machine that eats new trust to imitate old profit, a heart with no blood of its own, beating only as long as fresh donors keep walking through the door. And my wife's foundation had not been managed by that machine. It had been fed to it. 18 months earlier, one of Julian's largest institutional clients, a fund I will call Meridian, had begun asking for its money back. Ponzi schemes die of redemption requests the way patients die of bleeding, and Julian had needed a transfusion, fast, large, and quiet. So he had reached for the softest, least supervised pool of capital in his book, a dead woman's charity, overseen by a grieving old doctor who had been told to stop reading his statements. $2.3 million of children's heart surgeries had gone out the door to keep a con man's smile plausible for 1 more fiscal year. I took that fact the way you take a blow you have braced for. It was the next file that put me on the floor. It was late on the second night. Priya had organized the drive-by client name, and Bia was working down the list methodically when she stopped, took off her glasses, and said my name in a voice I had not heard from her before, gentle, the voice you use in hallways. Nathaniel, there is a sub-account here titled MW Education Trust. MW. Madeline Whitmore. Maddie. 7 years ago, when my granddaughter first announced at age 10 that she was going to fix hearts like her grandpa, I had set up an education trust for her, funded steadily every quarter since, built to carry her through college and medical school so that this one child, at least, would start her career owing nothing to anyone. $410,000. The last time I had looked, I made B open the file. The balance was $206. They had drained it in 11 months, transfer by patient transfer, and each authorization in the log carried the same 2 initials, confirmed by the same warm baritone on the same kind of recorded call. They had not only robbed my dead wife, they had reached into the future and robbed a 17-year-old girl who calls me every Sunday, who does not know yet, who is at this moment taping college brochures to her bedroom wall in Oregon. Twist number 1, and it landed exactly where they would have wanted it to land if they had ever imagined me finding it, directly in the heart. I stood at B's window for a long time that night. I thought about calling my daughter. I thought about calling Maddie. And then I put the phone down, because a surgeon does not run into the waiting room mid-operation to scream that things look bad. He finishes the operation. The only mercy I could offer that child now was a conviction. Twist number 2 arrived the following afternoon, and it came from B's microscopes, and it took my last comfortable illusion out at the root. You will remember that B had said the forged signature was fluent, internalized, written by someone who had grown up next to my handwriting. I had heard that sentence and flinched from it, because I only have one brother, and some diagnoses you delay reading. B did not delay. She had asked me for historical samples of handwriting from everyone close to me, and I had brought her what I had, and in that box were 40 years of Christmas cards, birthday cards, casual notes, all in Gordon's hand. B spread 2 decades of my brother's cursive across her table under the lamps, next to enlarged photographs of the forged signature, and she showed me, stroke by stroke, what she had found. The forger had habits. Everyone who writes has habits. Invisible fingerprints of motion, the angle of an approach stroke, a signature little hook where the pen leaves the final letter. The forged Nathaniel Whitmore was written in my letter forms, but it was driven by someone else's habits. And those habits, that approach angle, that terminal hook, appeared in every Christmas card Gordon Whitmore had sent me since 1985. And there was more, and this is the detail that ended something in me permanently. Among the papers in that box was a scrap I had kept out of pure sentiment, a page from a legal pad, 50-odd years old, from a summer when Gordon was in high school and I was already in medical school, and he had filled the page practicing his own signature the way teenage boys do, trying on versions of himself. Except half that page was not his name. Half that page, 50 years old, was mine. My signature, repeated, refined, improving line by line down the page. I had laughed when I found it decades ago. I had thought, my little brother wants to be me, and I had kept it because it moved me. B laid that 50-year-old page next to the forged trust amendment and said, quietly, "This was never new, Nathaniel. He has been rehearsing you his whole life." The voice work told the same story. The bank's fraud department, once B's preliminary report gave my lawyer leverage, released the recordings of the verification calls, and we sat in the carriage house and listened to a man who was not me pass 7 security checkpoints wearing my voice. B sent the audio to a colleague, a forensic audio analyst, and the finding, in plain language, was this. The voice was assembled, synthesized from source recordings, stitched by software, the kind of technology that has gotten cheap and easy in the last few years. And here is the thing about synthesized voices. They have to be trained on something. They need hours of clean recordings of the target. And who owns hours of clean recordings of me? 40 years of birthday toasts, holiday dinners, retirement speeches, all shot on his own camera at his own insistence, because Gordy was always the family documentarian, always waving that camcorder, saying, "Smile, Nate, say something for posterity." I had spent decades being flattered by my brother's camera. It was a harvest. Every toast, a tissue sample. Every speech, a training file. He had not merely helped Julian Rourke rob me. He had spent years, knowingly or half-knowingly, feeding pieces of me into the machine that would impersonate me, and when Julian needed a voice and a signature, Gordon had reached into his archive and handed them my ghost. "The old resentment," B said carefully, watching me. "You said he lived in your shadow." "For 60 years, I said. It turns out he was not living in it. He was studying it." Twist number 3 surfaced 2 nights later, at nearly 1 in the morning, and it changed the case from a family tragedy into something with a body count. Priya had told us my family was not the first name in the second set of books, and we finally reached the earliest entries. And there, 3 years back, was a client history with a shape I recognized instantly because it was the shape of mine. An elderly client. A trust. A flurry of authorizations late in life. Accounts swept into the family office structure and drained to meet a redemption crisis. The name on the file was Ashford. Colonel James Ashford, retired, a decorated veteran, a widower, a man I had met, because Charleston is a small town at a certain altitude, and I had stood at the back of his funeral 3 years ago and thought nothing except that it was sad, the way he had gone, confused and agitated at the end, insisting to anyone who would listen that money was missing, that papers were forged, that no one would believe him. His own family had gently talked over him. His doctor had adjusted his medications. He died 8 months after his accounts were emptied. Officially, of heart failure. Actually, I now believe, of something slower and crueler, the specific cardiac load of being robbed and disbelieved simultaneously, of watching everyone you love file your truth under decline. They had done this before, rehearsed it, refined it, buried the pilot patient, and moved on to me. This is not his first surgery, Bea said, reading the Ashford file over my shoulder, and her voice had gravel in it. It is his third, at least. You are just the first patient who woke up on the table. I sat with the Ashford file open in front of me, and I made myself read every page, the way I used to make myself attend the autopsies of my own failed cases, and somewhere in that reading the last of my hesitation died. Because up to that moment, some ancient, stupid, loyal cell in me had still been whispering about family, about handling this quietly, about sparing Gordon the worst. Colonel Ashford had a family too. They had spared everyone the worst, and the worst had happened anyway. To him, alone, disbelieved at night. Quiet is what these men grow in. Quiet is their native climate. I was done being quiet. Now, before I tell you about the meeting that turned my evidence into a weapon, I owe you the story of the night I was nearly caught, because it happened in this same stretch of days, and my hands remember it still. Priya's flash drive was damning, but copies of files, standing alone, can be attacked in court, challenged, disowned. B wanted originals where originals existed, and there was one category of original that mattered above all: the physical signature cards and executed agreements in the client files on the 9th floor. Priya, who had decided somewhere along the line that her conscience was worth more than her career, agreed to pull my family's original file on a Thursday evening when she was scheduled to work late alone, and I insisted, over both women's objections, on being the one to receive it, because if that handoff went wrong, I wanted the consequences landing on a 72-year-old volunteer, not on a 29-year-old whistleblower whose testimony we would need pristine. At 8:40 on Thursday night, the 9th floor was dark except for the accounting bay. Priya walked me past reception, my heart conducting itself with a calm I had to consciously impose, and she was sliding the Whitmore folder out of the records room shelving when we both heard it. The elevator. Rising. At 8:40 at night, in a building where only one man had cufflinks arrogant enough to come back for a forgotten phone, we heard the floor indicator chime, and Priya looked at me with her whole future collapsing in her eyes. And there was exactly one door within reach, the records room itself, and I stepped backward into it and pulled it to within an inch of closed, and I stood in the dark between metal shelves, holding my own family's file against my chest like a stolen organ. Julian Rourke walked past that door twice. I heard his shoes, that slow, expensive click. I heard him call to Priya, easy and amused, burning the midnight oil, and I heard her answer in a voice she somehow kept level: reconciliations. Mr. Rourke, quarter end. He stopped, the second time, directly outside the records room door. I could see the shadow of him interrupt the strip of light at the threshold. In my operating years, there was a number we lived by, the golden window when a heart has stopped, roughly 4 minutes before the brain begins to go dark, and I used to count it out in 40-second blocks, calm blocks, because panic is the enemy of a steady hand. Standing in that dark room, I put my old metronome on and counted. 40 seconds. His shadow at the door. He was reading something on the corkboard, or checking his phone, or simply existing there, enormous in the light strip, close enough that I could smell his cologne through the gap. My pulse stayed at 62 beats per minute. I know because I was counting it. That is not courage. That is training, and it is the only thing my whole life had prepared me to contribute in that moment. The ability to stand 2 feet from discovery, holding the evidence of everything, and keep my breathing slower than his. Then the shadow moved. The elevator swallowed him, and 10 minutes later I was in Priya's little hatchback with the folder in my lap, and she was gripping the wheel with both hands. And she started laughing, the shaky rain after lightning kind of laughing, and she said, "Doctor, I watch true crime every night of my life, and I want you to know that we are the worst criminals I have ever seen." And I said, On the contrary, we are the only honest people in that building. We just had to visit it after dark. The original file gave B everything she needed. The full report she assembled over that weekend ran to 60 pages, and it braided 3 independent strands of proof into one rope. Strand 1, chemistry. Ink on the questioned document, manufactured 4 years after the document's own date. Strand 2, digital. The notarized amendment existed as a scanned file in Rourke's system, and files, as Bea had promised, carry their history inside them like tree rings. The metadata on that scan showed a creation timestamp in the Pacific time zone, on a machine whose settings placed it 3,000 miles from the South Carolina notary, whose stamp it bore, on a date 2 weeks before the notary log claimed the signing happened. Strand 3, biology, or the closest thing paper has to it. Handwriting habits tying the pen to Gordon, and synthesized audio tying the voice to a training archive only Gordon possessed, and binding all 3 strands, the alibi no jury could resist, the operative record of St. Anselm's Hospital certifying that at the exact minute a voice was authorizing the largest transfer, both of the real Nathaniel Whitmore's hands were inside the open chest of a 6-year-old girl, in front of 11 witnesses, and 4 machines that never stop writing. On Monday morning, my lawyer and I carried all of it into a plain government conference room downtown, and across the table sat a man named Daniel Okafor, an enforcement investigator, a broad, deliberate man with the stillness of someone who has heard every lie twice. He read for 1 hour without speaking. Then he closed the folder, looked at me, and said, "Doctor, we have been circling Julian Rourke for 2 years, since Ashford. We had pattern, we had suspicion. We had a widow who called us every month. What we never had was paper. You are handing me a scalpel. Then use it," I said. Okafor smiled for the first time, and it was not a comforting smile, and I liked it. He said, "Here is our problem and our opportunity, Doctor. Rourke is liquid, mobile, and 1 bad rumor from running. Fraud men bolt the moment a client gets loud. But your file says he needs 1 thing to survive Meridian's redemption, a new whale, fresh capital, and it says he plans to consolidate your remaining assets Friday, which means for 6 more days he believes he is winning. A man who believes he is winning stands still. So we let him win. We give him the best week of his life. And I understand from the society pages that on Saturday night, he plans to spend it in a ballroom, at your gala, in front of 300 witnesses." "Yes," I said. "He asked for a night nobody forgets. 300 guests, 1 microphone, and somewhere under the stage lights, a signature 4 years younger than its own date. Saturday night, one of us was going to bleed out in public, and for the first time in this whole long nightmare, I knew with a surgeon's certainty it would not be me. On Wednesday, 3 days before the gala, my brother came to find me at the cemetery. I go to Camille every Wednesday morning. I have gone every Wednesday morning for 4 years, rain or shine, and Gordon knows it, which means his appearance there was not chance. It was strategy. The softest venue he could choose, the one place on earth where my history is buried shallow. I heard his shoes on the gravel before I saw him. It had begun to rain, one of those fine Charleston rains that does not fall so much as hang, and he came up the row of stones with an umbrella he did not offer to share, and he stood beside me in front of his sister-in-law's name, and for a while neither of us said anything. "Nate," he finally said, "I feel like something is off between us. Ever since that meeting at Julian's office, I know the money stuff is confusing, and I know it scared you. I just want you to hear it from me, brother to brother, before Friday. Everything Julian and I have done, everything, has been to take care of you. I want you to understand what he was doing, because it is a move worth recognizing. He was not there to confess. He was there to take my temperature. Friday was 2 days away, the signature that would launder every crime backward, and the mark had been slightly odd lately, slightly unavailable, and so the machine had sent its human face to the graveyard to listen to my heart. 50 years ago I would have heard love in his voice. Now I heard auscultation. And standing there over Camille, with the rain beating on her stone, I made a decision I had not planned to make. The operation was set. The trap needed him calm for only 2 more days, and the strategist in me said, "Pat his arm, say thank you, Gordy, send him home happy." But there are moments a man is owed the truth even when the truth is tactically expensive, And it turned out I was not willing to lie to my brother over my wife's grave. She would not have allowed it. So I chose a middle path. I told him the truth so completely that he would be unable to believe I knew it. "Do you remember?" I said, not looking at him. "The summer you were 16. You filled a page of my legal pad practicing signatures. Half of them were yours. Half of them were mine." The umbrella stopped moving. "I kept that page," I said. "All these years. I thought it meant my little brother wanted to be me, and it broke my heart a bit, in the good way. I looked at it again recently. Gordy, it reads differently to me now." "Nate, what are you?" he started. And there was a wire of fear under the warmth now. I could hear it vibrating. I turned and looked at him then. My only sibling, 68 years old, rain on his glasses. And I said the sentences I had been rehearsing, not for the gala, not for any courtroom, but for him, because a man should hear his sentence from the judge, who loved him. "You stopped being my brother," I said, "the moment you sold my voice for a wire transfer. I do not know yet exactly when that was. I suspect I will find out to the minute, eventually, because everything is on paper somewhere. Gordy, everything. That is the one thing your new friend never told you. Blood makes us related. It has never once, not for one day of 68 years, made you family. Family was available to you the whole time. You chose the ledger." His face went through things I will not describe, because some of it was performance, and some of it was real, and I no longer had the instruments to tell which. What he finally said was, "I never hurt you, Nate. Whatever you think is happening, I have never in my life raised a hand to hurt you." "Oh," I said, "but you did. And the strange thing, Gordy, the thing I will take to my own stone right there next to hers, is that you did it with my own handwriting." He left without another word, walking fast through the rain, and I watched him go and felt the cut complete itself, clean at the margins, the way you always hope an excision will be. You should know that I did not feel triumph. Nobody who has ever actually amputated anything feels triumph. You feel the weight of the part that is gone, and you check the living tissue, and you keep working. I knelt, put my palm flat on Camille's stone, told her, "Saturday, sweetheart," and went to war. Would he run to Julian? Of course he would. He was probably dialing before he reached his car. And this is where the architecture of the trap earned its keep, because Okafor had planned for exactly this tremor. Think it through as Julian would. The old man says strange things in a graveyard. Cryptic, wounded, no specifics, no lawyers, no police. And meanwhile he has not cancelled Friday, has not moved money, has not missed a beat of gala planning. To a con man, a mark who suspects but stays put is not a threat. He is a solved problem. An old fool who half knows and cannot face it, hiding from his own diagnosis. And more than that, Julian could not run even if his spine flinched, because Wednesday was also the day the whale surfaced. Let me tell you about the whale. Monday, while I was in that government conference room, a message had arrived at Rourke Capital through an intermediary attorney, the kind of channel serious money uses. A family office representing quiet industrial wealth, recently liquid after a private sale, was seeking discreet management for an initial allocation of $12 million. With more behind it, and the principal, a reserved gentleman named Mr. Daniels, had heard good things and would be in Charleston that week. For a healthy firm, this is a nice phone call. For a Ponzi scheme bleeding out from Meridian's redemptions, it is a heart transplant rolling through the door in a cooler. Julian cleared his calendar. Mr. Daniels, you will have gathered, was Daniel Okafor, wearing a better suit and a federal recording device, and on Tuesday afternoon, in a private dining room, Julian Rourke spent 90 minutes performing his cathedral for a man whose job was writing down every brick. I have heard that recording. It will be played in court, so I will only give you the shape of it. Okafor, folksy and skeptical, worrying aloud about markets, and Julian leaning in with the lullaby. Our clients do not experience drawdowns, Mr. Daniels. Returns are smoothed at the master pool level. When any single strategy underperforms, we backfill from pooled reserves. No client has ever waited on a redemption. The machine carries everyone. Backfill from pooled reserves. 6 words. There are men serving long sentences for 6 words like that. A Ponzi scheme cannot describe itself honestly without confessing. And Julian, smelling $12 million, described himself in loving detail, and even volunteered the garnish, mentioning that this Saturday Mr. Daniels should come to a gala as his guest and watch the firm's most beloved client, a famous old surgeon, publicly entrust the family legacy to the platform. "Optics," Julian said, "matter enormously in our business." "They do," Mr. Daniels agreed. "They really do." So the stage was set by the man who thought he owned the theater. Now let me show you the theater. The gala of the Nathaniel Whitmore Heart Foundation is held every year in the grand ballroom of an old hotel on Meeting Street. Chandeliers like frozen fireworks, 300 guests, silent auction, a string quartet, and at 9 o'clock, traditionally, my speech. Eleanor Sloan has chaired that foundation board since the beginning, a retired hospital administrator with a spine of surgical steel and a lifelong loyalty to Camille. And on Thursday night I sat in her kitchen and told her everything and watched her go pale, then still, then cold, in that order. And then she said, "What do you need the stage to do?" "God bless the Eleanors of this world," I told her. She took out a legal pad and started rewriting the program of her own gala, like a field marshal redrawing a battle. The choreography we built was simple, because good operations are simple. Every complication is a place to bleed. The evening would run exactly as printed: cocktails, dinner, auction, warm and glittering and ordinary. Julian and Gordon would be seated front and center at table 1, honored guests close to the stage, because Eleanor had personally called Julian to say the foundation wished to recognize his years of stewardship, and vanity is the one confirmation that never declines. Okafor, as Mr. Daniels would sit at Julian's elbow, the whale beside the harpoon. Scattered through the room, unknown to each other's neighbors, would be several quiet guests with government posture. B. Langley would be backstage with a sealed copy of her report and a set of exhibit slides. At the door, handling coats, would be 2 of Okafor's people, because doors matter at the end of these stories. And at 9 o'clock, I would rise to give my speech, the same as every year. Only the speech had changed. Priya spent those last days living her ordinary life at the firm with a wire's worth of courage and no wire, under strict instruction to change nothing, flag nothing, and above all to be visibly, boringly normal. And she was magnificent, reconciling ledgers by day for a man she was helping to bury by night. Her formal cooperation agreement was signed Thursday in the same plain conference room. B sealed her report Friday at noon, 60 pages, 3 braided strands, chemistry, metadata, handwriting, plus the operative log from St. Anselm's, certified, stamped, and beautiful. I signed my witness statement with Maddie's pen. It seemed only right. And then it was Saturday night, and I was standing in the ballroom in my dinner jacket, shaking hands, being congratulated on the foundation's wonderful year by people who could not know the foundation was a shell with 14 cents in it, and across the room, under the chandeliers, Julian Rourke was holding court at table 1, laminated and luminous, one hand on my brother's shoulder, telling some senator's pudding story, while beside him the whale nodded along. And honestly, I want to tell you, the acting in that room could have won awards in 3 categories. Dinner, auction. The paddles rose, the numbers climbed, the room did what Charleston rooms do. I ate nothing. At 2 minutes to 9, Eleanor took the podium, thanked the committee, and said, "And now, the reason we are all here, the man Camille loved, our founder, Dr. Nathaniel Whitmore," and 300 people applauded, and I walked up into the lights. I stood at the microphone and let the applause die all the way down. I found Julian's face at table 1, open, expectant, proprietary, a man watching his asset perform. I found Gordon beside him, and Gordon was not smiling. Gordon had not smiled since the graveyard. Somewhere behind my ribs, my pulse ran level at 64, and I heard the old sentence one last time: "Panic is the enemy of a steady hand." And I began. "For 40 years, I said, I opened chests for a living. Tonight, I am only going to open a file." A ripple of polite laughter, the room assuming a joke was coming. I did not smile, and the laughter thinned. "Every year I stand here," I said, "and tell you what your generosity built. Operating rooms, small repaired hearts. This year I owe you something different. I owe you an accounting, because this year I learned that the foundation bearing my wife's name the foundation you funded with your own hands, was robbed. Not by strangers. Systematically, patiently, over 18 months, down to a balance of 14 cents. And the men who did it are in this room, and they are seated, by my arrangement, at the best table in the house. You have never heard 300 people go silent like that. The quartet stopped mid-phrase. Somewhere a fork rang against china, and the sound carried like a shot. At table 1, Julian Rourke's face performed concern the way an actor performs grief, on cue and to the back row, leaning toward Gordon, murmuring, "The poor man." And I watched him begin to stand, gathering the room's sympathy toward himself, opening his hands. "Nathaniel, my friend, perhaps this is not the venue." "It is the only venue," I said. "You chose it. You told your newest investor optics matter enormously in our business. So, let us have optics." The screen behind me lit, and B. Langley walked out of the wings. She looked wonderful. I will say that forever. Small and silver and calm as a Sunday morning, reading glasses on their chain, 60 pages in her hands, and she introduced herself to the ballroom the way she has introduced herself to 100 juries. Name, 3 decades at the State Crime Laboratory, board-certified forensic document examiner. And then she put on her glasses and, in the dry, patient, merciless voice of science, she read Charleston the film. Exhibit 1, the Trust Amendment, dated 2019. Photomicrographs of the signature filled the screen. Huge, beautiful, damning. Finding, the ink is a gel formulation first manufactured in 2023. A document cannot be signed 4 years before its ink exists. Exhibit 2, the notarized scan, and its metadata, created in the Pacific time zone, 2 weeks before the notary log, says the pen touched paper, 3,000 miles from the stamp it carries. Exhibit 3, the verification calls, and the spectrograms bloomed across the screen like storm charts, synthesized speech, assembled from source recordings, and beside them, the operative log of St. Anselm's Hospital, certified, showing that at the exact minute that voice charmed a banker, the man it imitated stood gowned in an operating room with a 6-year-old's heart in his hands. 11 witnesses, 4 machines, every minute stamped. I stepped back to the microphone into a silence you could have biopsied. "Julian," I said, "you told a banker you were me. 11:40 in the morning, March 14th. You made a joke about golf, but at that exact minute, both of my hands were inside a child's chest, and every second of it is in the record. So, answer the room one question, and then we can all go back to dessert. Where were your hands, Julian?" And in the third row, a chair scraped, and a small woman in gray stood up, and her voice cracked exactly once. "My name is Margaret Ashford," she said. "Colonel James Ashford was my husband. He told everyone, and no one believed him, and he died. I believe him now." The room broke like a wave. 300 voices at once, guests standing, a paddle clattering, someone near the back already on a phone, and through all of it Julian Rourke stood at table 1 with his smile finally gone, and what replaced it was worse. A flat reptile arithmetic, eyes moving from the stage to the screen to the crowd, calculating exits. And then he laughed, one short, ugly bark, and pitched his voice to carry the last performance of a dying cathedral. "Very theatrical, doctor," he said. "Ink and slideshows. You cannot prove intent, old man. Not in any courtroom in this state." And at his elbow, the whale rose from its chair, buttoned its jacket, and stopped being Mr. Daniels. "Maybe not," Daniel Okafor said pleasantly, taking out a leather credential wallet and letting it fall open. "But the gentleman you pitched on Tuesday sends his regards." And that was when the side doors of the ballroom opened. They came in quietly, which somehow made it worse. No shouting, no drawn weapons, none of the cinema people expect. Just 8 men and women in plain dark suits moving through a ballroom of black ties with the unhurried confidence of people who own the ending. 2 peeling toward the main doors, 2 toward the service corridor, 4 converging on table 1. And I stood at the podium under my wife's name in gold letters on the banner, and I watched the machine I had spent 3 weeks assembling close around the men, who had spent 3 years assembling one around me. Okafor did the honors himself, and he did them almost gently. "Julian Rourke," he said, "my name is Daniel Okafor. I am a federal investigator. You are being detained tonight in connection with securities fraud, wire fraud, forgery of financial instruments, and aggravated identity theft, and I would encourage you to hear the rest of it somewhere with fewer photographers. And simultaneously, and this is the part Julian never saw coming, because con men study people and forget to study paperwork, a second officer stepped to the microphone stand beside the stage and served the Foundation's counsel, publicly, with the order we had asked the court to sign that afternoon. An emergency order, granted on the strength of Bea's report and Priya's ledgers, freezing every account of Rourke Capital Advisors and the Whitmore family office, placing the entire structure into the hands of a court-appointed receiver, effective that minute. Not Monday, not after appeals. That minute. Understand what that meant, because this was the first blade of the double blow, the economic one. A fraud like Julian's does not fear arrest half as much as it fears freezing, because arrest comes with lawyers and bail and delay, but a freeze stops the blood. From that minute, no wire could leave, no account could empty, no offshore escape hatch could open. The clawback would begin within days, the receiver reaching backward through 18 months of transfers, recovering what could be recovered for the Foundation, for the Ashfords, for a list of victims that would eventually run to 9 families. The machine that ate new trust to imitate old profit had just had its aorta clamped in front of 300 witnesses. That is how you kill a tumor, by the way. Not by shouting at it. You cut off its blood supply first, and then you excise it at your leisure. The second blade was the criminal one, and it fell in the same minute. And I will confess to you that of all the sentences spoken that night, the one that gave me the coldest, cleanest satisfaction was 6 words long. Julian, understanding at last, wheeled on Okafor with the fury of a man betrayed by his own greed. You sat at my table, you shook my hand, that meeting was private. And Okafor said, mildly, everything you told me on Tuesday, Mr. Rourke, you told the government. And then, because the man has a sense of occasion, he added, returns are guaranteed. We backfill from the master pool. Your words. We kept them safe. Julian Rourke looked around that ballroom then, and I watched him do the arithmetic he had done in every room his whole life. Who can I charm? Who can I frighten? Who owes me? And for the first time the answer came back 0, and something behind the lamination cracked. He did not go quietly after all. He went the way his kind always go. Loudly, downhill, in stages. He demanded his attorney in a voice that had lost its baritone velvet. On the sidewalk outside, under the porte cochere, in front of the valet stand and 40 guests and at least 3 raised phones, he made the call, and I was close enough, being escorted out to give my first statement, to hear the half of it that mattered. Marcus, it is Julian. Listen carefully. I need you tonight. And then a pause. And then, what do you mean, conflicted out? Marcus, I have paid your firm 7 figures. And then a shorter pause. And then nothing. Because the man on the other end, whose firm the receiver's order had reached 90 minutes earlier, had hung up on him. His own attorney. Hung up. On the sidewalk. And Julian Rourke stood there in the wet Charleston night holding a dead phone. And then the valet, God love him, a kid of maybe 20, chose that exact moment to inform him that his car could not be released. Sir, there are 2 gentlemen putting a seal on it. And Julian turned and saw the receiver's agents fixing a notice to the window of his luxury sedan. And the last performance collapsed. He screamed. There is no dignified word for it. A 54-year-old man in a $2,000 dinner jacket, screaming about who he knew and what he was worth at 2 federal agents calmly sealing his car, until they turned him around without heat, the way orderlies turn a patient, and walked him to a plain sedan, and folded him into it, and the door shut on his voice mid-sentence. The optics, I am told, were enormous. And Gordon. You want to know about Gordon. My brother had not moved from table 1 through any of it. He sat there through B's exhibits, through Margaret Ashford, through the doors opening, with his hands flat on the tablecloth, and when the agents finally reached him, he stood up before they touched him, and he looked at them, and then he looked at me on the stage, 60 feet away, and what happened next surprised every person in that room except, I think, me. Gordon reached slowly into his jacket, took out his phone, and held it out to Okafor with both hands, the way you surrender something living. "It is all on there," he said, loudly enough to carry, because I believe he wanted it to carry. Every message from Julian, every instruction, 3 years of them. He told me the Ashford thing was a lie the family made up. He told me Nate would never even feel it, he said, and my brother's voice went to pieces on this sentence. In front of Charleston, he said, "No one gets hurt, Nate." He said, "Paper cannot bleed." The room was silent again, a different silence than before, and everyone in it was looking at me. And I came down from the stage and crossed that ballroom floor, the longest walk of my life, past tables of people who had known us both for 40 years, and I stood in front of my little brother while the agents waited, showing more patience than the moment required. And I looked at him, rain still somehow in the creases of him from Wednesday. Or maybe that was new. "Paper is the only thing that bled tonight, Gordon," I said. Everything else just finally stopped pretending. They did not handcuff him. His cooperation had begun before they crossed the room, and it would continue for months, his phone becoming the map of the whole structure, his testimony the thread that stitched Julian to the Ashford file, and the government, in time, would call that cooperation substantial, and a judge would weigh it the way judges do. I said nothing to influence it either way. That is the truth, and people find it strange, and I will explain it before this story ends. They walked him out through the service corridor to spare him the photographers, which was a mercy I noted, and did not ask for, and did not object to. The legal aftermath ran for 14 months, and I will give it to you the way the receiver gave it to the victims, in plain accounting. Julian Rourke was convicted on 11 federal counts: securities fraud, wire fraud, forgery, aggravated identity theft, and, because South Carolina has laws written precisely for men who feed on the old, exploitation of a vulnerable adult, stacked and consecutive. 24 years. He is appealing, I am told, from a facility considerably less walnut-paneled than the 9th floor. His licenses are gone, revoked by a professional board that took 40 minutes to decide. His name, which was always his real product, is now a cautionary tale taught, I am reliably informed, in 2 compliance seminars. The receiver clawed back a little over 60% of what the scheme had scattered, which the lawyers assure me is a remarkable result, and the Ashford family was made as whole as money can make a family that lost its patriarch to disbelief. Margaret Ashford sits on our foundation board now. She has a gift for making auditors nervous, and I mean that as the highest compliment I possess. Priya Anand was never charged with anything, because she had done nothing but her job, and then, when her job became a crime scene, her duty, she left finance entirely. She works now as an investigator for the same office as Daniel Okafor, hunting the Julians of the world from the inside of their own ledgers. And every year on March 14th she sends me a card. "Still counting, doctor," it says. "Thank you for the numbers." Gordon pleaded guilty to forgery and to aiding the fraud. The judge, weighing 3 years of crimes against 14 months of total cooperation, gave him 30 months, of which he will serve less. I did not attend the sentencing. My daughter asked me why, and Maddie asked me why, and I will tell you what I told them. I had already held his trial, on a Wednesday, in the rain, over her grave, and I had already passed the only sentence that was mine to pass. The state punishes crimes. It cannot punish betrayal. Betrayal is judged in a smaller courtroom, with a jury of 1, and my verdict was rendered, and it is final. He writes to me from the facility, 1 letter a month. I read every one. I have answered none of them yet. I said yet. At 73, you learn to leave one door unlocked, not because you expect to walk through it, but because locking it costs you more than it costs him. That is not forgiveness. It is triage. Some wounds you close, some you leave open to drain, and the foundation. Come here, this is the part I built this whole story to tell you. The Nathaniel Whitmore Heart Foundation reopened its accounts in the spring, funded by the clawback, by the licensing royalties of a certain valve I signed over in their entirety, and by a gala the following year that raised 4 times what any gala before it ever had, because Charleston, whatever else you say about it, knows how to answer an insult to one of its own. We funded 11 surgeries that first year back, 11 small hearts. I attended 2 of them, in the gallery, an old man watching younger hands do the work, and I felt Camille in the room both times, auditing, approving, and Maddie. Madeline Whitmore was accepted to college this spring. Pre-medicine, of course, stubborn as sutures. And her education trust stands whole again, restored to the penny by the receiver with interest the court insisted upon. The week the funds cleared, I flew to Oregon, and I sat at my daughter's kitchen table, and I took out my checkbook to write the first tuition deposit myself, old-fashioned, on paper, because some signatures should exist in ink. And I want you to picture what I signed it with. The blue-black gel pen, Maddie's birthday gift. The pen that sat unopened in a drawer for 2 years, and then dated a forgery, hanged a con man, indicted my brother, and saved everything my wife ever asked me to build. The same ink that hanged them signed my granddaughter's future. She watched me do it, and she asked why I was smiling, and I told her, one day, sweetheart, when you are a surgeon, you will learn that the instrument does not care how big it is. It only cares that somebody finally picks it up. So, let an old man close the way he opened, talking straight to you. If you are my age, hear me. Read your own statements. Every month, every line, no matter who tells you that you have earned the rest. The rest is how they take the rest. Never sign in a fog. Never sign under warmth. Never sign anything whose every page you have not turned yourself. And the moment anyone, family included, family especially, begins telling other people that you are slipping, write down the date, because that sentence is rarely a worry. It is usually a preparation. Keep one advisor who answers to nobody at your table. Keep one friend who owes you nothing. And keep your instruments sharp, whatever your instruments are, because the world will tell you that at 72, you are finished, and the world knows nothing. I was not finished at 72. I was experienced. And if you are young, hear me too. Somewhere in your life, there is an old man or an old woman that everyone has stopped listening to, and I am asking you, from the far side of this story, listen to them. Colonel James Ashford told everyone, and no one believed him, and he died of it. I told a bank manager, and he pitied me, and I nearly died of that too, just slower. Belief is not a small gift. Belief, offered to the old, is a medical intervention. Blood makes you related. I have said it before, and I will say it with my last breath. Loyalty and respect make you family, and the tragedy of my brother is that he spent 60 years close enough to touch both and chose to counterfeit them instead, the way he counterfeited everything else, my name, my voice, my trust. You cannot change a counterfeiter's nature, but you can, and this is the entire lesson of my 73rd year, you can decline to remain the original he copies from. They mistook my patience for weakness. Never do that with a surgeon. We are not weak while we wait. We are scrubbing in. If this story held you until this moment, do one old doctor a kindness. Share it with someone who has a foundation, a trust, a pension, a name worth stealing, because somewhere tonight a Julian is smiling across a dinner table, and the person he is smiling at watches this channel. Tell me in the comments, has someone you loved ever turned out to be the shadow on the film, and how did you find it? Because I read them. All of them, usually at night, in Camille's chair. Hit the like button if you believe the old are worth believing. Subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss what we tell next. And until then, this is Dr. Nathaniel Whitmore, 73 years old, still ticking, reminding you, check the ink. See you next time. Signature Outrosong.